John. Very good introduction to why this session is useful. And obviously thank you to the organisers for inviting me.
Use the microphone. You have to use the microphone. Okay, all right.
Sorry, is that better? Sorry, I thought I was doing my best shouting, but just say thanks to the organisers for inviting me here to speak today, and I thought that Sean's introduction was very useful because I don't think there's any point in us discussing at great length the horrors of austerity. I'm assuming that here everyone is against austerity, and therefore I want to concentrate entirely on the alternatives. There's no such thing as a purely economic answer, and in fact there's been a little bit of a revival of late of what something people used to call political economy, made famous by people like Adam Smith and Karl Marx and so on, i.e. the idea that economics isn't about mathematical formula, which they tend to think it is nowadays, but it's actually about choices, about resources and the choices we make. And so on that, I think politically, it's very, very useful that this government is now talking up recovery. Because if you look at the whole history of our movement, and I'm not talking about the anti-austerity movement, but a long tradition of our movement, it's always much easier to fight when people think they can win. If there's no hope, then there's very little fight. And as a result, the government saying there's recovery, which is meaningless to most people, is actually very useful. The reason it's meaningless to most people is because the way austerity works. Austerity ultimately is about the reduction in wages and in services and in social security provision, or, in the capital social wage, in order to drive up profits and the profit share. That's what it's about. And as a result, when you have recovery based on austerity, for a very prolonged period, you're going to have a situation where things like GDP will be recorded as somewhat higher, and actually most people's living standards will continue to fall, and may even continue to fall quite sharply. And that's the situation we are in now. But the political consequence of that is if people hear on their evening news every night that there is a recovery, they're going to say, well, where's my bloody share? Because why am I worse off? If there's a recovery, why, and we could list all the horrors of austerity, is that happening to me and people I know? So in that sense, all the recovery guff is very useful. But I want to focus on one particular thing, which is hardly ever discussed, but it's actually the reason why we have the system we have, and it's the word profits. And the reason we don't discuss it, because it's the sort of hidden element, although it's the decisive factor, it's the reason why people build factories or whatever it is they want to do, is they're not there to make widgets, because next year they might decide to make steel plates. They're there to make profits, and that's the great hidden thing in all the debate. And there are very few magic numbers in any aspect of life. I'm going to offer you today one magic number, that's 75 billion. 75 billion, until the most recent GDP data, was the fall in investment in Britain since the beginning of 2008. The fall in GDP is only 40 billion. I say only, it's still very substantial, and it's much, much lower than where it would have been had there been no slump. But you can see that the fall in investment way more than accounts for the fall in GDP, i.e. what we have is an investment strike. And that's the determining characteristic of the entire slump. Now the reason that's important is because you have to identify what the problem is before you can resolve it. And if it were the case that there was no money left, then we just have to lump it, I'm afraid. Because it really, if there are no resources to do something, then you can't magic them up. But the reality is, and I'm just before lunch, I went to the education session. And sort of my little party piece as the old man when I go to student meetings is I tell them that I went to university with no fees and on a full grant, which would be equivalent to about £1,000 a term now. And the economy, in real terms, it's not anything to do with inflation. In real terms, I'm old enough that the economy was literally half the size it is now. So where's the money gone? If the economy's grown to twice the level it was then, but we've got no money left, where's it gone? And the answer is that what we have is a declining rate of investment. And investment is only ultimately funded by one thing in a capitalist economy, and that's by profits. So if they're not investing the profits, well, where are they going? Well, that's where the magic 75 billion number comes in. Because I've just recently been doing, very focused on this in terms of all the capitalist economies, but just done some stuff on Burke. And it's actually very, very straightforward. What you have is a situation in Britain since 2008. As I mentioned, the fall in investment amounts to 75 billion. That's an annual recurring sum, the difference between now and then, to the beginning of 2008. What you also have this year is an all-time record in shareholder dividends, which are slightly more than 75 billion. Simultaneously, you also have a rise over the same period, 2008 to 2012. You have a rise in the cash that's being hoarded by companies of about 75 billion a year, hence the magic number. That's where the money's gone. It's basically gone as a payout to shareholders and hoarded as cash by what are called non-financial corporations. So that now, beginning of 2008, they had a cash pile of just under 80 billion. Now, it's well over 400 billion. That's where the money's gone. There isn't no money left, it's just they refuse to invest it. That's the problem, that's the cause of the crisis, uninvested profits, and profits that are paid out to shareholders. Now, that's the cause of the problem, but it's also the possible mechanism for resolving it. Because if that cash pile exists, like I said before, if there was no money left at all, then we'd just have to lump it. If it really was austerity, now austerity is the word we use in relation to wartime, when 60% of production was given over to the war because there was a crisis of existence. That's what happened during the war period. That's when there was austerity, that there was a huge curtailment of consumption. Austerity isn't something, though, that happens when it happens only to a majority of the population, and the tiny, if you like, the 1%, still continues to enjoy record bonuses, record shareholder payouts, and a growth of a cash mountain. It's gone from a cash pile to a cash mountain. What can we do about it? Well, in the famous words, in opposition to Thatcherism, there is no alternative. There's thousands of alternatives. You could have windfall taxes, you could nationalise, you could have levies, you could take direct control of industries, you could set up alternative means of production through the state. There are loads of alternatives to this, but I think the most important thing is that we register. Not only can we fight, but there are means by which we can win, and the means are there. It's just that they're never, for obvious reasons, spoken about. There's a clear alternative. Either we go down that road, or we go down to what I might call austerity in the raw, and that's Grangemouth. That's where you don't invest, you demand from the government that they invest, and you crush the workforce. So that's the alternatives we're looking at. Either we have an investment, state-led investment recovery, where the state takes some greater control over the economy, or we have austerity bred in tooth and claw like Grangemouth.